Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of the Parkinson's Policy Podcast, where we advocate together to raise awareness and advocate meaningful policy for the Parkinson's community. From Washington, D.C., right at the U.S. Capitol and beyond, we bring together senators, representatives, researchers, and advocates to amplify the voices of people living with Parkinson's disease. My name is Dr. George Ackerman, Sharon's son and founder of TogetherForSharon, joined with my incredible co-host, Margaret Preston, President of Power Over Parkinson's, and we want to welcome you back to another exciting episode, and it's really timely, which I'll let Margaret mention as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing one of our two guests during this show. And I do want to note it is April 7th, National Parkinson's Day of Action. So it feels quite right to be speaking with our two guests. And we're so thankful that they've joined us on this very important day in our community. So I would like to introduce Deborah Swerdlow. She is the Associate Vice President of Advocacy and State Policy at the Parkinson's Foundation. She leads the foundation's state policy work, as well as efforts to engage people with Parkinson's disease, care partners, and other community members in support of both federal and state policies. Through its policy and advocacy work, the Parkinson's Foundation aims to shape a future where PD research is steadily funded, every person with PD has access to care and support they deserve, and fewer people develop PD in the first place. Deborah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And I have the true honor to introduce not only someone I admire, inspires me, but also have the honor to actually meet, which is not always the case on virtual shows, but wanted to welcome you, Ken. And Ken recently retired from a long career in public service as a federal attorney. So many other accomplishments he's done throughout the United States government. He's also served our country, which is really, again, just something I could talk about for many, many hours, and how grateful we are for your service. Spent 18 years in the National Science Foundation, served as Deputy Inspector General, also joining the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General Corps. Later, Ken unfortunately was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2023. He's engaged throughout really the country, serves currently at the Parkinson's Foundation People with Parkinson's Advisory Council, and again, also has Substack, which I follow and I'm a big supporter of. So just an honor to have both of you here, and also Deborah, to be able to meet you, especially when policy is such a big issue the last few years and growing every day because of a lot of the work the Parkinson's Foundation does. Is truly, again, just an honor. Now I wanted to start us off by, I guess we can start with Ken. Maybe you can mention or let us know a little bit about what encouraged you to go into this area of work. Of course, I know you're diagnosed, but not always does everyone, become a voice for so many and inspire individuals like us.
Sure, thanks. So I can relate this to how it came into focus to me, or for me, as you mentioned. Diagnosis was a big motivator for that. So about 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I first thought I knew what Parkinson's was. Even at diagnosis, I thought I knew what it was. Basically, it's about tremor, and maybe it's about slow walking or shuffling or something like that. But as I learned more about it, the more I learned that there was a whole lot more to it, and a lot that I didn't understand. And I think that unfortunately, there's a lack of understanding among a lot of people about what Parkinson's really is, and that includes maybe some lack of understanding even among policymakers. May not fully understand it. The fact is, I've been experiencing a litany of symptoms for a number of years, and I basically dismissed them until the tremor came up. And then at that point, I got in to see a movement disorder specialist. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's pretty quickly after that. But that had been going on for a few years. But to me, it's that gap between what people, I think, assume about Parkinson's and the reality of it is exactly why advocacy matters, because the misunderstanding has a lot of consequences. It can delay diagnosis, it can delay treatment, which in turn compounds and prolongs suffering. At a larger scale, it can even limit the attention and resources that we give to things like research, care, and prevention. So those are the kind of things that sparked my interest in advocacy and spreading the word about Parkinson's. And as I was approaching the end of my federal government career, then I think it was in having spent most of that in DC, I think it was kind of a natural segue to take an interest in policy-based advocacy to kind of help bridge the gap between knowledge and action and awareness and policy. So those are some of the things that sort of added up and steered me in this direction.
Thank you for your service, and also now your continued service for the community as a police officer and working with the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. It means, again, the world that we have individuals like you speaking up still and not just retiring, because we need you. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to send the show to Margaret.
Deborah, I'd like to ask you the same question. What encouraged you to pursue this line of work?
Yeah, so I got hooked on policy and advocacy really early in my career, actually, when I was still in college. And what drew me to, just policy work in general is trying to make systemic change. When you're talking about changing policies, you're changing a system. And so the scale of impact is huge. And I really found, just like a deep connection to doing that work in the nonprofit space where everything is very mission driven. So I moved to Washington, D.C. right after college and, was fortunate to work in a number of nonprofits on different issues, tax and budget policy, anti-poverty policy, things like that. And then most recently had the chance to be in the federal government. So to see policy making from the inside of government. And when that ended, I was trying to think about how I wanted to make an impact, where I wanted to be next. And I really felt drawn to the nonprofit sector. And I was lucky to see this role at the Parkinson's Foundation. I'm relatively new. I started in December. I'm part of a new and growing team for public policy here at the foundation. There's 5 of us now, and we're growing. And so I feel very fortunate and honored to now be in this role, to be working on Parkinson's and with the Parkinson's community, working with people like Ken and so many people, all of you really, George and Margaret as well, around the country. I do not have a personal connection to Parkinson's in my immediate family, but what I was really struck by when I took this job and started telling people is how many people responded by saying, somebody in my family, somebody in my extended family, a loved one, a close friend, has or had Parkinson's. And for me, what drew me to the work was, again, that ability to make systemic change, but also fundamentally what we're talking about is how do we make sure that everybody has access to the best possible care for their health needs and is able to live the life that they want to live and with dignity. And so that's what drew me to the work. And then I think what's been really moving just in the few months that I've been here has been all of the people that I've gotten to meet and work with and to be a part of this community.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's just been such a privilege and incredible as an outsider watching you at the Parkinson Foundation and your counterparts at the Michael J. Fox Foundation, et cetera, really capitalize on the moment that we're having. So I can't thank you enough for helping to support those living with the disease through policy and kind of waving the flag and letting us have the national stage now, as so many large scale diseases have. And Ken, thank you for sharing your note too. If I could dovetail, my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's 8 years ago, and he did not have a tremor. So, and all we knew was the tremor, right? We all associate the disease with the tremor. So lo and behold, we learned a lot more about it and all the symptoms and everything that it encompasses. So even those affected by the disease, there's a learning curve. So if we can start educating folks who aren't even diagnosed yet or impacted, then folks have a better understanding, and then we can all kind of move the needle together, I think, collectively a little bit better. So thank you both for sharing that. Deborah, if I can jump into kind of the latest news in the policy world, I wanted to touch on the news out of Syngenta over the last couple of weeks that they were going to cease production of paraquat. What does that mean? Can you break that down for our listeners, and can we take a collective sigh of relief, or is the work still ahead of us?
Sure. So I'm going to start with, you said break it down. So I'll start at the beginning, but spoiler alert, there's still work ahead of us. So for those who aren't familiar, paraquat is an herbicide that frankly is incredibly toxic. It has been linked to a higher risk of developing a number of conditions and diseases, and Parkinson's is one of them. Exposure to paraquat increases your risk of developing Parkinson's. And Syngenta is one of the largest producers of paraquat. So what we saw a couple of weeks ago is Syngenta announced that they were going to stop making paraquat. That is a good sign. I think it also points to, the public pressure. I think the other thing to know about paraquat is that it's already banned in over 70 countries, including countries that Syngenta produces it in. So there are countries where Syngenta operates where they can't actually sell paraquat. They have to ship it to other countries like the US, which still allows paraquat and still purchases it. So there's more than 70 countries that have already banned paraquat. And so what we saw a few weeks ago is Syngenta announcing that they were going to stop making it. So again, that is a good sign. The reason that we still have work to do is they are not the only producers of paraquat. So it's good to see a major producer saying they're going to stop producing this chemical, but they're not the only producers. And so really, as long as paraquat is still allowed in the US, I would say in other countries, if you have any listeners in other countries, but again, we're a bit of an outlier in that 70 countries have already banned paraquat. So just speaking about the US for a moment, as long as it's still allowed to be sold and used in the US, people are at risk of exposure, and then they are at greater risk of developing Parkinson's. So one of the major policy priorities that we've been working on at the foundation is certainly trying to get the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to ban paraquat so that nationally it's no longer allowed to be used. But in the meantime, we're also taking a state-by-state approach because states also have the power to act to prohibit the sale and use of paraquat in their states.
Thank you. Thank you for breaking that down.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to, again, have to always be clear and honest here. And I'm a big supporter of the Parkinson Foundation. Unfortunately, I lost my mother, as many know, 6 years ago. Every time I say it feels like longer and longer. But we've been actually a participant on the committee and donated a lot from our family to the Parkinson's Foundation, Palm Beach, but just there 2 weeks ago. So it's kind of fresh and new. One thing I've noticed, and Margaret and I discuss a lot, is in doing this for many years, I just recently, in 2 years, have seen a huge increase in the care for policy, and that's again how we all met in Washington, D.C. at the policy forum. I was wondering on both of you, maybe kind of nothing in depth, because I know we could talk about this for hours, but I'm curious on your thoughts of why has advocacy, specifically policy, become really at the forefront, especially today, but something that I see popping up now in every foundation. I know we have the show because it's so important. Just curious on your views, both of you, as to why all of a sudden this is finally, which is incredible in a way, amazing that it's at the forefront, but in a way in my heart, a little sad that it hasn't been for 20, 30 years.
Well, I could share some thoughts, and Ken, I'd be interested in your thoughts as well. And you mentioned in the intro that Ken's on our People with Parkinson's Advisory Council. He's the person on the council working very closely with us on our policy and advocacy efforts. I mean, I think, I started with what drew me to policy work, which is the ability to make systemic change. And I think that is part of the reason why policy work has really been growing within the Parkinson's community, because there's a recognition that, it's important to be an advocate at sort of all levels. There's self-advocacy, advocate for yourself, or for someone you're caring for within the system with doctors and in your care journey. There's community advocacy, things like our moving day walks and community education. And I think there's a growing recognition that we also have to bring our advocacy skills to the systemic level. And, you know, the Parkinson's Foundation had already been doing that in terms of some of our hospital care work and our research work to make sure that research studies are really shaped by and informed by, you know, people living with Parkinson's. But yeah, I just think there's been a growing recognition that if fundamentally we're all here to improve the lives of people with living with Parkinson's and to change the trajectory of this disease in the future. And so I think there's just been a growing recognition that in order to really move the needle on both of those things, we've got to engage at the systemic level with policy work too.
Thank you.
Right, and I think that's exactly right. Is it flows from getting the word out. Even just having sidebar conversations, so to speak, informally with people and educating them about Parkinson's. I mean, what I hear a lot of times is people might say, "Well, you don't look like you have it," and then I might say, "Well, you know, what's it supposed to look like?" And then you kind of get back to the thing about, well, it's kind of a shaking disease or maybe shuffle. And what you're seeing there is advocacy, because it opens up a conversation about what Parkinson's really is. And then we have in the Parkinson's Foundation, we have ambassadors who go out and talk about Parkinson's in the community. So I think it all flows from spreading the word about Parkinson's and getting the word out. And when people understand more about it, then they want to help. They understand the depth of the problem. And when you share your own story about it, it really, really brings it home. I've noticed that in community discussions I've had about Parkinson's. Once you add your own story into it, if you're comfortable doing that, it really just elevates the desire to want to work toward a solution. So I think those things, getting the word out, are really kind of having an effect, and more people are understanding that the link between knowledge and action, awareness and policy is there. And so advocacy is kind of moving into a strong place in the Parkinson's community, fortunately.
I'm grateful that we're all part of history and that you two and the Parkinson's Foundation are helping lead the way. So thank you both. Send back to Margaret.
Deborah, I wanted to ask, what are the pillars of the Parkinson's Foundation policy strategy as we move through 2026?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, as I said, our mission, this is really about extending our mission to work at this systemic policy level. So still about making life better for people living with Parkinson's and, you know, by improving care and advancing research toward a cure. So what that means for our policy work are, I'd say, you know, three or four main things. One is supporting research funding. This is at both, all of these priorities actually are at the federal and the state level. And as you mentioned in your introduction, I focus primarily on our state level policy work. So, you know, first and foremost, we absolutely need to sustain and increase research support at the National Institutes of Health, NIH. And we're working in partnership with others in the Parkinson's community to reach $600 million for NIH Parkinson's research funding. So that's a very important pillar around research. And there's other things that we can do around advancing research support as well. Another priority is around care and prevention. So we've already actually spoken about prevention in terms of paraquat, you know, trying to ban paraquat and other chemicals that we know have an increased risk to Parkinson's. And a lot of the care work is around, you know, making sure that we're strengthening the policy systems that underpin the kind of care that people can access, both the quality of that care, and also the accessibility. So whether you can access, you know, specialists and things like that, and the affordability. So things like insurance coverage of biomarker testing, as we've been able to discover some biomarkers that, you know, help us, are another tool for diagnosing Parkinson's. And then finally, we have a pillar of policy work around education and really making sure that everybody has access to high quality information and tools and resources about Parkinson's. That's people who are living with Parkinson's and diagnosed, people who are caring for those with Parkinson's, and providers too. I mean, part of all of these things work in tandem with each other. Part of improving care is making sure that healthcare providers have access to the information and the training and the resources that they need to be able to, better diagnose and support people living with Parkinson's. So all of these things really do go together as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And what I hear is really goals set from point of diagnosis and better diagnostics through disease management. So I can appreciate that full spectrum of policy effort. So thank you.
Yeah. And also, prevention. So can we even get to the point where
Yep.
in the first place?
Yeah.
And I hope on the other end of the spectrum one day a cure, not just disease management, but a cure. And that's where the research support comes in.
Yeah. Thank you. It's lofty work that you're doing, but as George and I both have had or have parents with Parkinson's, we can't thank you enough for your effort.
Thank you.
Well, my question is kind of a two-part. First, maybe we could start with Deborah on how everyone listening can get involved to support you and the Parkinson's Foundation. And then also for Ken, this is an important area of my heart, and Margaret, which we haven't touched on yet, but we are going to have a full show in the future. But really on veterans, one of the asks, we kind of, one of the main asks, I feel, maybe even one of the most important was supporting our veterans and their families, such as yourself, who have been diagnosed, or preventing this from other veterans today in the field. They're out there right now. We wouldn't be here. I'll speak for myself, but I wouldn't be able to serve our country or even have a home or family if it wasn't for the work that our past, vets, present, and future are doing and serving as we speak this moment. But I'm just curious on your thoughts too, how we can really get the word out and support vets more. So.
Well, as far as veterans go, I mean, yes, that is a subject near and dear to my heart. We're learning more and more about some of the service-related causes of Parkinson's. Obviously, I mean, going back for example, to the Vietnam era, my dad was exposed to Agent Orange. He didn't have Parkinson's, but he did have severe neurological troubles throughout most of his life since then, which very well may have been a byproduct of Agent Orange exposure. We're learning just so much every day about the kinds of things that people are exposed to in the military that may lead to Parkinson's. So yes, veterans, very, very near and dear to me. And so getting the word out about the needs of veterans in the Parkinson's community, very, very important.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And so in terms of how to get involved, and Ken can also speak to some of the ways that, he's been a policy advocate. But I would say for anybody listening who wants to get involved, first thing that I would recommend you do is visit our advocacy center, which is policy.parkinson.org. Again, that's policy, just singular.parkinson.org. We got a lot of things that you can do there. First of all, you can learn about those policy issues that I mentioned and kind of dive deeper and learn a little bit more about those policy priorities. You can sign up for updates and action alerts. So, ways to stay in touch or stay engaged and stay informed. And also ways to take action to be able to easily message your members of Congress or your state lawmakers about some of the bills that are advancing these policy priorities forward. And you can also just find out more information about, who your legislators are, and see how to follow them on social media and things like that. And we'll be continuing to build out more resources for people to take action. But that's just a great place to start, policy.parkinson.org. Sign up for our updates and our action alerts. As was mentioned at the top, today is a National Day of Action, so we've got some resources there for that. And we just always update that with the latest action opportunities.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I find so exciting in a way, even though it's, we don't want anyone to have to battle this, is that now I know when we do shows today, we can actually have listeners participate. In the old days, like just 2 years ago, it's not that old, I kind of ended my shows and just said thanks, goodbye. But now you can actually have everyone listening join in, and that's something that's not just rare, but also I feel beautiful. And thank you again for that. And I'm going to send the show back to Margaret.
Yeah, absolutely. And all links noted in the show, we will include in our video. So not to worry if anybody missed a link or website. I wanted to dovetail and kind of tie a ribbon on advocacy. Deborah, if I can start with you and then moving to Ken, who innately was energized to affect change and become an advocate. But I wanted to ask, how do we energize patients, care partners, and the community at large to head over to the Parkinson's Foundation policy website, to email their local congressman? Like, how do we kind of instill a little bit of fire, so to speak, to energize and mobilize our folks to share their stories and become an advocate?
Yeah. Well, I would pick up on something that Ken actually mentioned about like sharing your story and how it can be really powerful. I always, whenever I am meeting somebody for the first time, especially if they're like not sure about policy work, I want to get to know them. I want to hear their story, hear what they're passionate about, hear what moves them, hear what they wish was different, and I think what is really impactful then, and what can kind of be a way to energize folks into advocacy, is to find the things in your experience or somebody else's experience that you care about, that you wish was different. And oftentimes there's a policy solution to that. Like, you've actually identified something you've certainly identified that it's a problem, and there can be a policy solution. And so I think finding that thing for you, and then being able to, talk with somebody at an organization like ours to make that connection to the policy solution, and then be able to take action. And then your story becomes one of the most powerful things that you can share to then energize lawmakers to care about the issue and to take action.
Thank you for sharing that. Ken, go ahead.
Right. And as far as the things you can do, I mean, I've gone up to Capitol Hill and walked the halls of Congress, spreading my own story about that, and trying to engage on solutions for policies that move the needle on Parkinson's. You can do that in mass as far as things go, like the Parkinson's Policy Forum, where folks just all came together and did it so effectively. But what I try to do to energize action, in one respect, is to lower the barrier on what that means, and then also to explain why that's important. Advocacy doesn't necessarily mean you have to get on a plane and come to Washington. There are ways, as Deborah mentioned, of advocating for policy solutions at different levels of government, state, and local, as well as federal. And for people living with Parkinson's and care partners, their voices carry a huge message, and hearing directly from people through whatever way that is, whether it's email or in person or a phone call or whatever it may be, hearing from people who are affected by Parkinson's can be very, very powerful. So just the raising awareness about the disease is not separate from the policy solutions. It helps drive them. It helps drive the solutions, because the more people really understand about this disease, the more opportunities we have to get on top of it and to change the trajectory of it in terms of care and prevention, and then hopefully a cure. So I think for me, having again worked most of my career in Washington, I see policy solutions all over the place, because and I know how effective those can be, and I try to let people know what policy initiatives are out there and how they can support them, and hopefully just knowing those things will help energize support to get involved.
That's so well said. I think you both broke it down very nicely, and equating advocacy with awareness and education. I think sometimes it's daunting for patients and care partners to say, well, what can I add? How can I possibly move the needle in terms of legislation? But I think, what you're saying is advocacy equals just simple education and awareness and sharing your story, because that drives the legislation and policy. And you all have unique and remarkable stories, and lawmakers are there to listen and learn about the disease and some of its drivers. So thank you both for answering that.
Well, and I'll say that the other thing that I think can be really energizing is seeing the instances where this community has moved the needle. You know, we do have policy wins that we can look at to fuel our work going forward. And yes, sometimes it does take a long time. That's the thing about trying to change a system, is that it can be a long game sometimes. But you know, we do have wins. You know, one of our recent wins being the passage of the, you know, National Parkinson's Project almost unanimously in Congress. So I think those wins, when they come, can also be very energizing.
Thank you.
Well, you've all energized me, so I'm ready to get back out there and keep fighting. But before we wrap up, unfortunately, that's the time which Margaret knows I don't want us to go. We could spend many hours because it's so important to all of us. But maybe Ken can start, and Deborah, as we wrap up, what message of encouragement can you leave the Parkinson's community today?
Well, I think there's a lot to be encouraged by. Like I said, in 3 years since I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's, I went from knowing pretty much zero about it to tapping into the resources that are out there. One of the first places I turned, in fact, the first place I turned, was the Parkinson's Foundation once I left my neurologist's office. And then I learned so much about Parkinson's, and then that encouraged getting involved. And then getting involved into advocacy work and policy focused advocacy. And I just hear a lot of people. I found that there are a lot of people out there doing the same thing. So it feels like there's just a lot of energy around finding a solution to Parkinson's and finding policy solutions to it. And I find that encouraging. And I think there are a lot of folks really ought to find it encouraging that we're at a moment where there's that kind of energy.
Yeah. And this has